Hello, in the fourth part of this mini lecture series on marketing communications, we're going to start looking at the message component. So what do we actually construct our message from? So marketing communication theory suggests that we have a number of choices in terms of the content of our message. We can use, for example, product-related content. So we could craft a marketing message and the content of that message is information about the product or service that we offer. Could be price, availability, features, benefits, that sort of thing. Or we can have a marketing message that's purely about the brand. So we're not talking about the product, we're just talking about us. We could be BMW or Audi, and we're not talking about the car and the speed and the efficiency. We're just talking or communicating the brand. We can also have what we call user-generated content. So we could have a marketing message that shows or has captured a customer using our product or service. So although we may have planned it, we may have edited it and uploaded it, so we are the sender of the message. The content of the message could be a user, so user-generated content. It could be a review, a testimonial, or filming somebody using the product sort of observational. The content of the message could also be influencer-generated content. So again, we could orchestrate, organise, pay, plan, or let the influencer do the planning, but facilitate the crafting of a message where somebody influential, whether they are an influencer or a celebrity or an expert, is using our product or service or talking about our product or service, testing it, trialing it, and we publish that message. So we as the organisation are still the sender, but the content of the message is influencer generated content. So these are just some of the content types that we can have. And it's also important to consider why we would try to sort of have this different content. And one of the reasons is because of the perceived source influences the message credibility. So even though it may be on our channel, on our platform, or on our newsfeed and from our social media page, users will actually look to the source message or the perceived source. So if we have used an influencer or a customer in the marketing message, they will actually look to that source for credibility. So this is why marketers quite often try to have a blend of branded content, user-generated content, and influencer content in their marketing messages. Other parts of the message construction relate to the blend or balance of emotional and informational content. So sometimes, as mentioned in the previous lecture, our message can be very emotional and we're trying to impact thinking and feeling, or sometimes we can be giving information so that people can make a decision and make a rational decision. So with your marketing messages, they don't have to be one or the other. They don't have to be all information or purely emotional. It can be a blend. And this is a kind of spectrum. And where your message sits on this spectrum will depend. It will depend on the customer, their experience with you and the product, the amount of information that they need, the amount of response or the cognitive effort that's required, or perhaps how involved they are in the purchase decision. So high involvement products, so for example, if you had saved for a long time and you wanted to buy a luxury car, you perhaps want to collect a lot of information about that car, price, attributes, warranties, 0 to 60, time, miles per gallon, that sort of thing. So you might be looking for rational appeals. But conversely, as a child, you may have seen an advert or a hero like James Bond driving a certain car, and you've saved up all your life for that brand of car because it means something to you on an emotional level, on an aspirational level, and you might ignore the fact that it's not very economic, that it doesn't have great petrol efficiency. You might ignore the fact that it's expensive to run and there's not many places that will offer a warranty because you were buying purely for emotional reasons. So there's an emotional response. Generally in marketing, we quite often think of lower ticket items, so a pint of milk, a loaf of bread, a can of Coke, as being what we call low involvement, things that we don't do research, we don't go on the internet, we don't say, okay, where can I find the cheapest pint of milk, which brand, which farm sells the best, the most high nutrient pint of milk. We just go to the shop, and we pick up a pint of milk. It's low involvement. Or we walk down an aisle in the supermarket and we pick up a chocolate bar. So these are what we call low involvement purchases, and quite often again it's an emotional response. It's based on enjoying it, a hedonic orientation, having a nice chocolate bar or a tropical flavored drink. So we tend to, as advertisers, use emotional responses, so colour, associations with fun and enjoyment, to try to trigger the response and to catch people's attention and to get them to buy the product or service. So just a little example, if you're buying a house, for example, this is for most people high involvement. It's once or maybe just a few times in a life you would buy a house, so you do a lot of research. Again, there's a high level of risk because there's a lot of money involved. And when it comes to things like a Mars bar, can of Coke, bread of milk, low risk, very little money involved, so very little cognitive effort. So we tend to have a lower involvement in those sort of purchases. So just to recap, if we are purchasing something that's very low involvement, chocolate bars, pints of milk, bread, magazine, again, emotional content might be more effective at stirring us and getting us to purchase or to engage. And when it comes to something that's more high involvement, something where there's more perceived risk, we will look for more information to try to mitigate that risk and make sure we are making the right decision. So just a little recap as well. So cognitive processes with high involvement assumes that the audience is undertaking rational information processing. So if we assume as marketers that our customer wants to make considerations, wants to weigh up benefits, wants to understand the value of our product or service, then we're going to be providing lots of information to help them with their cognitive response. If we believe that our audience is making a decision based on emotion, on sort of fulfillment, on fun, on kind of satisfying the ego, then we're more likely to have an emotional message to stimulate them to be successful. So here are a couple of examples. Apologies for the low pixelation, but just some examples of two very different organizations advertising. So the computer that's being advertised, the content of the advertisement is purely about functions and features and what the device will do. Another way of having sort of a rational appeal offered by the supermarket chain is by comparing. So you're supporting the cognitive process of comparing options, mitigating risk, getting the most value. So these are two examples how organizations can use a rational appeal for cognitive processing to help people make a decision. Again, this is another example where a cognitive response is being solicited. So this particular advert is focusing on the efficiency of the car, the fact that it's aerodynamic, fuel efficient, and all of the different reasons why having a hybrid is a good idea in terms of the miles per gallon. So you get 40 highway miles per gallon, and that's compared to 21 other hybrid cars, that's more. So you get more value for money. So it's a very, very rational appeal. They're not selling this car on lifestyle, on aspiration, on sex appeal. It's about efficiency and saving money. So information persuades, but emotion motivates, and that's according to Gensler, Vochner, Lou Tompkinson and Wirtz. So that's a really nice way of kind of encompassing that yes, information helps to persuade us, it's part of that decision-making process, but ultimately emotion can motivate us to make that purchase. So emotion is closely linked to the ego, to either approach or avoidance. So we can either try to approach that desired state where we want to be something, again, aspiration, fulfillment, sort of that kind of fulfilling a dream, or we want to avoid, it could be being perceived as, an outsider, or making social mistakes, so wearing the wrong clothes or driving a car that people sort of don't like or respect or mock us for. So quite often our ego is driving us to purchase things or to desire certain products and services based on who we think we are, who we'd like to be, and how we'd like people to see us. So in the previous lecture, I showed a couple of ads that were provoking doing behaviour. But these ads also use an emotional element. So they use the emotion fear. So in the first government public service advertisement, they're using fear of having an injury, a terrible accident, to make people change their behaviour. So people are fearing pain, they're fearing loss, they're feeling accidents, and the government is giving the solution: wear your seatbelt. The second campaign, the fear is ego. So the fear is, if you don't use mouthwash, you will lose a tooth, and that will affect your self-esteem and the way people see you and your attractiveness. So both of these campaigns are using fear as a method to kind of stimulate behaviour. These campaigns are using sex to simulate a behaviour. So sex doesn't have to be overt like it is in the first campaign. I think this is a Calvin Klein campaign, which is very sexual. The Lynx company, the body spray in the second image on the right, had a long campaign, possibly, I think it started in the late 90s, early 2000s, that went on for a very long time, associated using the body spray with increasing your sex appeal, and quite often featured an average looking guy being chased by lots of attractive females after using the spray. As the zeitgeist and what people see as appropriate in terms of sexual stereotyping has changed, the Lynx adverts have kind of come away from this campaign, and they're not quite as prolific and popular as they once were. Sex appeal can also be more subtle. It can be about sort of style, elegance, attractiveness, and aspiration. So you'll probably quite often see mature actors or actors of high regard, such as George Clooney, making coffee or coffee drinking look sexy and appealing. So sex doesn't have to be about having sex. It can be about that kind of sex appeal or charisma and style and elegance. And again, it's quite prolific in advertising generally. Another way we can use emotion to make our message effective is by using humour. So as humans, we love to laugh and we love to be amused. And there's many different types of humour, such as the unexpected, or double meanings and innuendo and double entendres, which is quite a popular type of humour in the United Kingdom. But it's worth thinking about, if you're ever doing an international campaign, what sort of humour is acceptable, appreciated, or common or widespread in different countries. What can be very funny in one country can be very rude and offensive in another country. So there's lots of different ways of making our message emotionally engaging by using different types of humour. So if you want to see an example of using humour, particularly kind of like an awkward humour, you can have a look at this Campaign Live clip from a Tango, which is a drink, fizzy drink campaign, where they're using sort of embarrassment and humour to sell their drink. Again, there's not a lot of information about the actual product itself in there, so it's a very brand orientated campaign using humour as an emotion to be successful. Another way of using emotion is to use animation and music. So animation kind of gives the creator carte blanche on creating new universes and situations, and creating sort of positivity and idealism and surrealism. So it really opens up the options that the creative person has. So again, very popular in advertising campaigns, because it's a very strong way of communicating a sort of an emotional message. Again, music can be very, very important. John Lewis have used this very effectively in their Christmas campaigns. The music that supports an advert campaign can be a really powerful trigger for emotion. And if people hear that music or that jingle again, it brings back those memories and that emotion. So it can be quite powerful. So again, having famous actors' voices, a jingle, epic music, sentimental music, or theme tunes are a really, really important part of crafting the message and communicating successfully. So in summary, there are many different message components that you can incorporate. So your message can be very informational and feature information about the product, or information about the brand, about the value that the customer will derive from engaging with your product or service, or your message can be very emotional, and it can be sort of creating an emotional state using fear and avoidance, or attraction, or surrealism, or joy. So there's lots of different ways you can actually make your message engaging, and the creative technique can help to be that wrapper that makes people notice and engage with your actual message. Both have an important role, and both are important, both emotion and information, decision making and persuading, and your message can have elements of both. It's a spectrum. And finally, the contents of your message can be from a perceived source. It could be perceived that your message is from the brand, or you can introduce a user or an influencer within the message, so it's perceived that they are the source of the message, and that in turn affects the credibility of the message. So these are some of the components of a message that you can think about: the informational component, or the emotional component, and the source component. So you can craft a message, and you can kind of help to think about how it can be effective for your audience.